On the evening of May 3, 2007, in the quiet coastal town of Praia da Luz, Portugal. But by the end of that night, 3-year-old Madeleine McCann was gone, and the world would never be the same. 18 years later, after millions spent and a prime suspect behind bars, a shocking twist has emerged in June 2025. Someone from inside law enforcement may have just helped that suspect walk free. Why would they do that? And what happens now? This story isn't over. On May 3, 2007, the McCann family was vacationing in Praia da Luz, a peaceful coastal village in southern Portugal. They had traveled from the United Kingdom to enjoy a week-long getaway at the Ocean Club Resort, accompanied by a group of close friends, 3 couples with children, collectively referred to by the media later as the Tapas 7. It was meant to be a relaxing break for young families, sun, sea, and simplicity. The McCanns were assigned apartment 5A on the ground floor of one of the resort's whitewashed blocks. The flat had 2 access points, a front door facing the street, and a sliding glass patio door at the back, which opened into a small garden area leading toward the resort's pool and tapas restaurant. The patio entrance became the preferred road in and out for the adults during their stay. It was also the more discreet one, no keys needed. Inside apartment 5A were 3 children. Madeleine McCann, just 3 years old, shared a bedroom with her younger twin siblings, Sean and Amelie. She was the eldest, curious, playful, and instantly recognizable by a small coloboma, a rare defect in her right iris that made her eye unique. Her parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, were both physicians, Kate a general practitioner and Jerry a cardiologist. The couple seemed organized, responsible, and outwardly composed. That evening, the McCanns made a decision that would haunt them forever. Around 8:30 p.m., after bathing and settling their children into bed, they left the apartment unlocked and joined their friends for dinner at the resort's tapas restaurant, approximately 100 meters away. From their table, they could not directly see the apartment, but they committed to checking on the children in regular intervals every 15 to 30 minutes. At 9:05 p.m., Jerry McCann stood from the table and walked back to apartment 50A. He later recalled that all seemed fine. He saw Madeleine asleep in her bed, the twins undisturbed. He returned to dinner, confident their system of checks was working. At 9:30 p.m., their friend Matthew Oldfield offered to check on the McCann children while doing his own rounds. But instead of walking into the bedroom, he peeked inside from the hallway. He noticed the room appeared quiet and moved on, never laying eyes on Madeleine. Then came 10 p.m. Kate McCann left the restaurant to do the next check. As she approached the apartment, something felt off. The bedroom door, usually left partially closed, was now wide open. Inside, the window above Madeleine's bed was open, the shutter lifted. The curtain was blowing inward with the night breeze. Madeleine's bed was empty. Kate reportedly froze. Then, a moment later, she ran back to the tapas restaurant, shouting a chilling phrase that would become infamous in the case's early narrative. "They've taken her." Her scream sparked immediate chaos. The dinner group scrambled back to the apartment, splitting up to search the area, the poolside, the surrounding alleyways, the beach. Resort staff were alerted. Within minutes, the news spread from table to table across the resort. Madeleine McCann was gone. At 10:30 p.m., the Ocean Club's management contacted the local police, the GNR Guarda Nacional Republicanat. Officers arrived just before 11 p.m., while frantic efforts continued in and around the resort. Neighbors were awakened. Other guests joined the search. By midnight, over 60 people had mobilized in the area. A local priest arrived to console the family. Dogs were brought in, and the search expanded to nearby streets, bushes, and the beach. Still, there was no sign of the child. Back at the apartment, troubling signs emerged. The window in Madeleine's bedroom, rarely opened during their stay, was ajar. The shutter, which was typically closed and locked from the inside, was now raised. Yet, strangely, there were no signs of forced entry, no scratches, no broken locks. The room itself remained neat. The twins were still asleep. It was a disappearance without struggle, without noise, and seemingly without witnesses. The McCanns' grief soon collided with confusion, and suspicion. Critics questioned why the apartment door had been left unlocked. Others raised eyebrows at the practice of leaving young children alone in a foreign country while dining elsewhere. The TAPAS 7 system of dinner and rotations drew intense scrutiny in both the media and among investigators. Public opinion began to fracture. Some showed empathy, others judgment. The initial response from law enforcement also drew significant criticism. The first officers on the scene did not immediately seal off apartment 5A. In fact, dozens of people, including resort staff, guests, and the McCanns' friends, had moved through the apartment in the hours after Madeleine vanished. Fingerprints were likely smudged, potential DNA evidence compromised. The crime scene had become porous, chaotic, and nearly useless from a forensic standpoint. One of the most haunting aspects of that night was the timing. By reconstructing events, 8:30 p.m., the McCanns leave for dinner. 9:05 p.m., Jerry checks the apartment. All seems normal. 9:30 p.m., Matthew Oldfield checks, but doesn't confirm Madeleine's presence. 10 p.m., Kate discovers the disappearance. 11 p.m., police arrive. After midnight, search extends to town perimeter, beach, and neighboring structures. That 30-minute window between 9:30 and 10 p.m. became the heart of the investigation. Was someone watching? Did they know the routine? Had this been planned? Adding to the confusion was Kate McCann's anguished cry, "They've taken her." To some observers, especially early Portuguese investigators, the phrasing was too specific, too certain, almost as if she knew what had happened. Suspicion briefly turned toward the parents. In many missing child cases, law enforcement is trained to look inward first. But others argued that such a scream was simply a mother's instinct, a pure, raw expression of dread the moment she saw the empty bed and open window. From the beginning, there was friction between the McCanns and the Portuguese police. The cultural and procedural differences between UK expectations and the Portuguese justice system led to misunderstandings, miscommunication, and growing mistrust. While the parents pleaded for international help, local investigators initially treated the case with guarded caution. In retrospect, those first few hours were critical and perhaps catastrophic. Evidence was missed. Eyewitnesses were not interviewed quickly enough. And most importantly, the perpetrator, if one existed, had a considerable head start. When officers from the Portuguese National Police, known as the GNR, finally arrived at apartment 5A, just before 11 p.m., on May 3, 2007, Madeleine McCann had already been missing for nearly an hour. In that short span of time, the most crucial opportunity in any missing person case, the golden window, was already closing. And as the hours ticked by, so too did the hope of a rapid and effective investigation. From the start, the local police were unprepared. Praia da Luz was a quiet resort town. Officers stationed there had no specialized training in child abduction, no units familiar with international crime coordination, and no emergency protocol for a suspected kidnapping involving foreign nationals. Their initial response was limited to assisting the search on foot, flashlights in hand, combing nearby streets, bushes, and walkways. They never cordoned off the apartment. They didn't secure potential exit routes, and they failed to treat the site as a possible crime scene. By the time investigators began considering the need to preserve forensic evidence, it was already too late. More than 20 people, family, friends, hotel staff, neighbors, had passed through apartment 5A. In a collective panic, they had hugged Kate to comfort her, walked across the room, opened closets and windows, and even sat on Madeleine's bed. Someone reportedly touched the shutters. Another moved a chair. In doing so, they unknowingly trampled over what could have been the case's most critical physical evidence. No fingerprints were taken that night. No DNA swabs were secured. The open window, which may have been an entry or exit point, was not forensically examined until much later. By dawn, the scene was no longer viable. It had become contaminated beyond repair. While Madeleine's disappearance was immediately alarming to her family and friends, local authorities did not initially classify it as a serious criminal event. Early on, police theorized that Madeleine might have wandered off in the night and gotten lost. Another working theory was that someone had temporarily removed her, but intended to return her. It would be hours before the case was escalated to an official child abduction. By then, a vital opportunity had passed. Despite international borders being only hours away by road, no orders were given to alert customs or airport officials. There were no immediate roadblocks, no check-ins with local ferry ports. It wasn't until the next day that search dogs, helicopters, and extended patrols were deployed. By then, if someone had taken Madeleine and fled, they were likely long gone. One of the most critical challenges arose from the cultural and procedural gap between the British expectations and the Portuguese legal system. The McCanns, along with UK officials, expected a robust response modeled after British standards: immediate forensic preservation, mobile phone triangulation, CCTV retrieval, coordinated press briefings. But in Portugal, investigations followed a stricter judicial process, with limited technological capacity and a heavier burden of procedural formality. Communication between the two nations' authorities was slow and often confused. A language barrier added further complications. Portuguese officers reportedly felt condescended to. British observers viewed the investigation as disorganized and lethargic. There was no appointed liaison, no joint command. As a result, two separate investigations unfolded, parallel, but rarely aligned. This vacuum of clarity quickly became fertile ground for rumor and speculation. Details began leaking to the press, sometimes from official sources, other times anonymously. British tabloids painted the Portuguese police as inept. Portuguese newspapers, in turn, began to suggest that the parents were hiding something. The case was no longer just a criminal matter, it had become a media war. Within months, the narrative shifted. In August 2007, Kate and Gerry McCann were formally named arguidos, legal suspects under Portuguese law. The tipping point came after search dogs, brought in from the UK, alerted to the smell of human blood and decomposition in the McCann's apartment and in the trunk of their rental car, though the car had been rented weeks after Madeleine's disappearance. The media seized on this development with fury. Headlines screamed of missing blood, forensic breakthrough, and parent cover-up. But beneath the sensationalism, the evidence was far from definitive. No DNA match could conclusively link the findings to Madeleine. There was no body, no eyewitness, no direct proof of wrongdoing. The dog's alerts were, at best, circumstantial, and yet, the damage was done. Under growing public pressure, the case veered off course. Investigators who had once been focused on potential abduction were now redirecting resources to building a case against the parents. Despite the absence of hard evidence, surveillance intensified. Gerry and Kate's behaviors were scrutinized. Their composure was interpreted as coldness, their emotional outbursts as performative, their pleas for help as too polished. Behind closed doors, the McCanns were unraveling. In her later memoir, Kate would write, "I felt like we were being investigated instead of being helped." They begged for access to police files, to call transcripts, to witness interviews, most of which were denied. Trust between the McCanns and the authorities eroded rapidly. And the longer the search for Madeleine stalled, the more the investigation imploded under its own contradictions. Meanwhile, critical time continued to slip away. In any missing person case, the first 72 hours are statistically the most crucial. They're the window in which witnesses recall the most, physical evidence is freshest, and escape routes are still traceable. But for Madeleine McCann, those 3 days were a maelstrom of confusion, missteps, and wasted chances. Faced with the failure of the official response, the McCanns turned to the public. With no structured media strategy from law enforcement, they organized their own press conferences, distributed photographs, and launched a website. To some, this was seen as proactive. To others, it seemed manipulative. Some questioned why the parents were so present in the media, as though managing an image rather than mourning a child. But the truth is simpler and darker. They had no choice. In the absence of institutional support, they had to become the voice of their daughter. By the end of 2007, the case was in disarray. No leads, no charges, no trace of Madeleine. What remained were fractured international relations, an angry and divided public, and a family trapped in limbo. Looking back, the systemic failures are undeniable. The crime scene was never protected. Forensics were delayed. Media speculation went unchallenged. Investigative theories shifted without coordination. And above all, the instinct to blame the parents, what psychologists call parental involvement bias, overshadowed the more urgent need to pursue an external offender. In the years that followed, technological advancements, international cooperation, and better understanding of child abduction dynamics would evolve. But for Madeleine McCann, the window of opportunity had already closed. And what was left was not just a missing child, but a case that, for a critical moment, lost its way entirely. In the days following Madeleine McCann's disappearance, something unprecedented happened. A 3-year-old girl from a quiet British family, who vanished from a small resort town in Portugal, became one of the most recognized faces in the world. Her photo, wide eyes, soft smile, and a distinctive mark in her right iris began circulating across continents. Airports, train stations, supermarkets, and newsstands from Lisbon to London, from New York to New Delhi, all bore her image. Within a week, Madeleine had become a global symbol, not just of a missing child, but of a shared, universal fear that no child is ever truly safe. It was, by all accounts, one of the most expansive missing child campaigns in modern history. And unlike typical police-led efforts, this global search was largely orchestrated by her family. With little structured support from Portuguese authorities, Kate and Gerry McCann took it upon themselves to lead a media movement. They launched a website, Find Madeleine, just weeks after her disappearance, designed to gather tips, donations, and global awareness. They distributed posters and flyers in over 20 countries, many translated into local languages. They issued press releases, held press conferences, and even traveled to other nations to meet with political figures and advocacy groups. They appeared on talk shows, international news broadcasts, and documentaries, all to keep their daughter's name in circulation. The McCanns also embraced the evolving power of technology. As months passed with no confirmed sightings, they turned to age progression imaging, working with forensic artists to simulate what Madeleine might look like at age 6, 9, even 12. These composite renderings were released to the public in waves, always accompanied by pleas for information. The goal was clear: never let the world forget what she looked like, or that she was still missing. In tandem with their media efforts, the McCanns established the Madeleine's Fund, a financial vehicle to support the ongoing investigation and campaigns. In just a few months, the fund received millions of pounds in donations, pouring in from celebrities, corporations, and concerned citizens across the globe. High-profile figures like Sir Richard Branson and J.K. Rowling made notable contributions. The money helped the McCanns hire private investigators, international lawyers, and media consultants, a full-scale parallel operation to what the official investigation lacked. Yet, with visibility came scrutiny. As the fund grew, so did public questions about how the money was being spent. Critics asked, should parents be in charge of such a large pool of money while still under media suspicion? Was every pound accounted for? The McCanns published financial statements and repeatedly clarified that the funds were used strictly for search efforts, but doubts lingered in some corners of the public sphere. In 2011, 4 years after Madeleine's disappearance, Kate McCann released a memoir simply titled Madeleine. The book chronicled her family's ordeal in intimate, emotional detail: the night Madeleine vanished, the faltering investigation, the media frenzy, and the hollow, aching persistence of hope. She described waking every morning with the same thought: is today the day we find her? The book's purpose, Kate explained, was twofold: to raise additional funds for continued private investigation, and to document the truth for her surviving children, Sean and Amali. Reception was mixed. Many readers praised the book for its raw honesty and unfiltered grief. Others, however, accused Kate of exploiting tragedy, profiting off her daughter's story. But beneath the controversy lay a deeper psychological truth: writing can be a form of survival. For Kate, putting her pain into words may have been the only way to remain intact amid a storm of uncertainty. It wasn't about commerce, it was about control. In a world where she had lost nearly everything, the book was something she could create, own, and shape. The public image of the McCanns also began to shift. In the early days, they were depicted as stoic, devoted parents, clinging to hope in the face of incomprehensible loss. But as months turned to years, and the media cycle grew colder, a more cynical narrative began to take hold. Some questioned their composure. Why were they not more distraught on camera? Why did they dress well for interviews? Why did they continue appearing on TV instead of grieving in private? A particularly harsh strain of criticism accused them of being too calculated, too controlled, as if they were managing their image, rather than mourning a child. The idea that they might be hiding something began to resurface, fueled by tabloid speculation and internet conspiracy forums. But the truth, again, was more complex. The McCanns were doing what any parent would do. If the systems around them failed, they took charge. They understood that media attention is fleeting. Without their constant presence, without reminding the public, the authorities, the press, Madeleine's case could quietly fade into the shadows. Every TV appearance, every interview, every controlled message was part of a desperate strategy to keep the search alive. Behind the scenes, though, the toll was immense. Kate and Jerry were living in a suspended reality, their daughter gone, but not confirmed dead. Their grief was paralyzed by ambiguity, their healing denied by the absence of closure. They had to remain hopeful for the cameras, while privately enduring what psychologists describe as ambiguous loss, as the most painful, unresolved form of mourning. Kate once described waking up each day with dread and guilt for leaving the children alone that night, guilt for being in the spotlight, guilt for being suspected. Jerry, more reserved, became the logistical backbone of their operation, while Kate's emotional vulnerability took center stage. Their marriage, though strained, became a united front, two parents bound not only by love and loss, but by the shared mission of bringing their daughter home. Over time, Madeleine became more than a missing child, she became a symbol. Her image was used in child protection campaigns, abduction awareness posters, and global discussions on cross-border policing failures. She represented every child who had ever disappeared without a trace, and every parent who had waited endlessly for an answer. Her face, familiar to millions, was no longer just a photo. It was a statement: this can happen to anyone, anywhere. But symbols, too, come at a cost. As Madeleine's case became more iconic, it also became more politicized. Resources were poured into her search, while other missing children remained ignored. The family received both admiration and resentment. Some felt too much had been done, others not enough. The line between empathy and fatigue blurred. And yet, through it all, the McCanns kept going. Because for them, Madeleine wasn't a headline. She wasn't a campaign. She wasn't a symbol. She was their daughter. And that was reason enough to keep searching, no matter how long it would take. As the years passed, and the mystery of Madeleine McCann's disappearance remained unsolved, a strange phenomenon began to emerge, one that investigators had never anticipated. From various corners of the world, individuals stepped forward to declare a shocking belief that they were Madeleine. Not that they knew where she might be, not that they had seen her, but that they were her. Between 2007 and 2025, hundreds of people contacted authorities, media outlets, and even the McCann family directly, claiming to be the missing child. They came from the UK, Europe, North America, and beyond. Some were teenagers, others adults. Some offered vague memories of childhood trauma, or feeling different. Others cited physical similarities, a birthmark, a childhood scar, or in the most frequently mentioned case, a coloboma, the rare defect in the iris of the right eye that made Madeleine's face so distinctive. To the public, these claims often came off as bizarre or delusional. But to the McCanns, each one represented an emotional bomb. Because what if this time, it wasn't a hoax? The most high-profile of these cases came in early 2023, when a young woman from Poland named Julia Wendell sent shockwaves through the internet by publicly announcing she was Madeleine McCann. Julia, then in her 20s, stated that she had little to no memory of her early childhood and claimed that her family had long refused to give her access to her birth certificate. Her physical appearance bore certain superficial similarities to Madeleine's projected adult features. But more than that, Julia came armed with evidence, photos of her eye, which she believed showed a coloboma, and a mark on her leg, which she said matched one from Madeleine's early pictures. Julia's claims went viral almost instantly. Her social media accounts attracted hundreds of thousands of followers. Media around the world scrambled to interview her. She appeared on international television, participated in online live streams, and released comparison videos. Many believed her. Others mocked her. But no one could deny that the world was watching. Under increasing pressure from public speculation, the McCann family agreed to a DNA test. They had nothing to lose and perhaps, just maybe, everything to gain. The results came in quietly, weeks later. There was no genetic match. Julia Wendell was not Madeleine McCann, and neither was anyone else who had ever claimed to be her. Over the past 15 years, every single person who came forward with such a claim was ruled out, whether through DNA, medical history, or inconsistencies in their stories. But the question remains, why would someone falsely believe, or pretend, to be a globally known missing child? According to psychologists, the answer lies in identity, trauma, and attention. Some individuals experience what is known as identity confusion, often linked to childhood neglect, adoption, or family dysfunction. When people grow up lacking clear answers about their past, it becomes easier to project their pain onto an existing narrative, especially one as well documented and emotionally charged as Madeleine's. In other cases, the motivation may stem from attention-seeking behavior, a deep psychological need to be seen, validated, or even rescued. The idea of being the world's most searched-for child brings with it a twisted form of comfort. If I'm her, then I matter. I'm not forgotten. Some of these individuals may genuinely believe their story. Others may knowingly deceive. But whatever the motivation, the consequences are real, especially for the McCanns. Every false claim forces the family to revisit their pain. Each possibility brings a moment of hope, followed by inevitable disillusionment. Kate McCann once described these moments as cruel form of emotional whiplash. First the call or email. Then the rising anticipation. Then the reality. It happens again and again. Hope, verification, heartbreak. A cycle that leaves deep, invisible wounds. And beyond the emotional toll, these claims have a tangible impact on the investigation. Each public declaration pulls attention and resources away from legitimate leads. In high-profile cases like Julia Wendell's, police and private investigators are often forced to divert their time toward confirming or disproving someone's identity. In Julia's case, the media storm consumed weeks, giving many in the public the false impression that the case was nearing resolution. Instead, it was a false signal, a distraction dressed as hope. Worse still, social media plays a dangerous role in amplifying these false narratives. Well-meaning individuals share posts, engage with speculative videos, and demand updates, often before any facts are confirmed. A viral post can reach millions within hours, creating an illusion of credibility. People believe what they want to believe, especially when a story seems emotionally satisfying. But in the end, a likeness is not proof, and a feeling is not forensic evidence. The McCanns, despite their pain, have handled these episodes with restraint. They have issued carefully worded statements. They have thanked people for caring, while cautioning against premature conclusions. Their main concern has always been the same: to protect the dignity of Madeleine's name, and not let it become a vehicle for public spectacle or personal delusion. There is, however, a deeper lesson here, one that goes beyond the McCann case. In an era of instant virality, truth becomes fragile. The speed at which stories spread often outpaces the speed at which facts can be verified, and when people conflate sympathy with certainty, justice suffers. false claims, no matter how heartfelt or convincing, can harm real investigations, mislead the public, and exploit real families still waiting for answers. As of 2025, no one who has claimed to be Madeleine McCann has been confirmed as such. DNA has ruled out every possibility. Background checks have uncovered inconsistencies. And while many of these individuals carry their own pain, their stories are not hers. Madeleine McCann is still missing. And the person who took her, or knows what happened to her, is still unknown. In June 2020, 13 years after Madeleine McCann vanished from her family's holiday apartment in Praia da Luz, Portuguese authorities confirmed what German police had just revealed. They had a suspect, not just a theory. A man, a name, a location, and perhaps a turning point. His name was Christian Brueckner, also referred to as Christian B. in official documents, and his presence at the center of the Madeleine McCann investigation was not coincidental. Brueckner, a German national born in 1976, had long been known to police on both sides of Europe for an extensive criminal history. While his past included multiple offenses, ranging from theft, drug trafficking, and assault, it was his record as a convicted sex offender that placed him in the darkest corners of suspicion. In 2020, investigators announced that Brueckner's cell phone had been traced to the exact area surrounding the Ocean Club in Praia da Luz on the night Madeleine disappeared, May 3, 2007. The cell tower data didn't just place him in the same town, it placed him within meters of the McCanns' holiday apartment, at the precise time frame during which their daughter went missing. It was the first piece of technological evidence that directly linked a known predator to the crime scene. But what elevated Brueckner from a potential presence to a central suspect wasn't just the data, it was his own words. According to investigators, a former acquaintance of Brueckner later came forward, claiming that the German man had boasted about abducting a child in Portugal. Another witness reported that Brueckner had previously made disturbing and hateful remarks about children, reflecting a deep-seated sexual deviancy. These statements, though not admissible as proof of guilt, added psychological dimension to an already grim profile. Just 2 years prior to Madeleine's disappearance, in 2005, Brueckner raped a 72-year-old American woman at her home in the Algarve, just a short distance from where the McCanns had stayed. He broke into her home, tied her up, beat her, and sexually assaulted her, then vanished. The case remained cold until years later, when DNA evidence linked him to the crime. He was convicted in Germany and sentenced to 7 years in prison, a sentence he is still serving as of mid-2025. The disturbing proximity, both in geography and in method, to Madeleine's case did not go unnoticed by prosecutors. They believed the two incidents might share more than coincidence. Brueckner had been living in a camper van in the Algarve at the time. He was known to drift between countries, often using fake names and forged IDs. He fit the psychological profile of a mobile offender, someone who acts alone, moves silently between borders, and exploits gaps in jurisdiction to escape justice. In June 2020, German authorities took the extraordinary step of publicly naming him as the prime suspect. That same month, the German prosecutor overseeing the case stated with confidence that Madeleine McCann was dead, and that they believed Brueckner was responsible. However, they refused to release details about the nature of the evidence, sparking both hope and skepticism across Europe. Then came the next phase of the search. In May 2023, investigators launched a large-scale search operation at a raid reservoir, approximately 50 kilometers east of Praia da Luz. This was not a random location. It was an area Brueckner was known to frequent, and authorities believed he may have disposed of evidence there. Over several days, excavators cleared soil, giant pumps drained wells, and forensic teams sifted through acres of wilderness, looking for any trace of Madeleine, or what might have once been hers. They recovered several pieces of cloth, a few fragments of bone later identified as animal remains, and unknown fibers, which were taken in for lab analysis. But despite media speculation, no direct evidence linking Brueckner to Madeleine was ever publicly confirmed. The search, while methodical and highly visible, yielded no breakthrough. Meanwhile, Brueckner remained imprisoned in Germany, serving his 7-year sentence for the 2005 rape. But in June 2025, a new concern arose: he may be released early, as soon as September 2025, after reportedly having his court fines paid and time reduced for behavior and legal technicalities. The prospect of the prime suspect in the McCann case walking free has set off alarms across Europe. Despite years of investigation, no formal charges have been filed against Brueckner in connection with Madeleine's disappearance. German prosecutors say they continue to gather evidence, but time is running out. If Brueckner is released, there's no guarantee he will remain in Germany. He has lived in Spain, Italy, Portugal, and other parts of Europe. His itinerant lifestyle and history of evading authorities make him a flight risk. What makes Brueckner such a uniquely dangerous figure in this story is not just what he may have done, but how easily he could do it again. He lived off the grid, often in a camper van or abandoned homes, moving from village to village, often using stolen identities. He operated without routine, without roots. He had been known to film his assaults, and though German police reportedly seized several storage devices from him, the contents have never been disclosed to the public. He is not a man with a past. He is a man with a pattern. And the danger lies in what might happen if that pattern is allowed to continue unchecked. For the McCanns, the news of Brueckner's potential release has reopened deep wounds. They have urged authorities across Europe to act swiftly. Public pressure is mounting. Journalists have described the case as a race against time. Because if new evidence emerges after Brueckner is freed, after he's vanished again, there may be no second chance to bring him to justice. To this day, Madeleine McCann remains missing. There is no confirmed sighting, no remains, no conclusive evidence. Just a thread, taut, fraying, and fragile, leading back to a man who was there that night, near that apartment, when a little girl disappeared without a sound. His name is Christian Brueckner. And the world is still waiting for answers. In a shocking twist in 2025, a former German criminal police officer paid a large sum of money to reduce Christian Brueckner's prison sentence by 111 days. This development has not only stunned the case, but also sparked international outrage, raising questions about motives and connections within the justice system. It has added further complexity to the case and increased suspicions regarding internal relationships within the German police force. The woman in question, a former employee of the Federal Criminal Police Office of Germany, CBKA, explained that she made the payment because she believed the fine imposed on Brueckner was unfair. She stated that Brueckner's behavior toward prison staff was insulting and that, for this reason, the fine should be reduced. However, this explanation failed to convince the public and investigators. Her justification was deemed weak, especially as questions began to arise about her honesty and true motivations behind her actions. The involvement of a public official, who might have been entrusted with upholding justice, in protecting and assisting such a serious criminal as Brueckner, raised suspicions of internal manipulation and authority violations. In fact, this woman was not entirely a stranger to the case. She had previously been involved in setting up surveillance equipment in Brueckner's prison cell to gather information for investigations. This job required precision and professionalism, but her direct involvement with a suspect and subsequent intervention to reduce his sentence made her relationship with Brueckner murky. This raised clear concerns of a conflict of interest, suggesting she may have had personal reasons to protect Brueckner. The act of a law enforcement officer, seemingly going against the public interest and manipulating the legal system, could have serious consequences for the integrity of investigations. The woman's actions add another layer of complexity to an already twisted case. As her involvement in Brueckner's case was scrutinized, it was clear that the legal and ethical lines were increasingly blurred. If her intervention to reduce the sentence of a man suspected of committing heinous crimes was driven by personal motives, it only deepens the sense of a compromised system. This incident shocked both law enforcement agencies and the international public. If new evidence emerges after Brueckner's release, evidence that could prove him to be responsible for Madeleine McCann's disappearance, can the case be fairly prosecuted and handled? Will reopening the case face insurmountable challenges due to the loss of valuable time or the potential of missing the opportunity to convict? Meanwhile, this situation has added significant pressure on the German justice system. Legal experts have pointed out that releasing Brueckner after new information emerges could lead to a massive scandal, as it demonstrates negligence in properly addressing the movements of dangerous criminals, particularly when there are suspicions about the relationship between officials and the suspect. This event also reveals a troubling reality. Not all criminals face justice fairly, and it could set a dangerous precedent for how serious cases involving dangerous criminals are handled in the future. This situation highlights a potential danger. Brueckner's release could have unforeseen consequences if he continues to commit crimes or attempts to escape the scrutiny of law enforcement. The release of a key figure in a high-profile case like this could not only slow down the process of uncovering the truth, but also threaten the ability to bring the perpetrator to justice. The story of Christian Brueckner is not just about the disappearance of a child. It reflects a justice system under intense scrutiny, where personal motives and internal manipulation can severely harm the investigation process, leaving victims like Madeleine McCann to continue living in a cycle of injustice. In a world filled with suspicion, twists like these only make justice harder to attain than ever before. In 2023, a significant development in the investigation of Madeleine McCann's disappearance occurred when authorities announced the discovery of several objects near the original crime scene. These items, weathered by years of exposure, were found close to the Ocean Club resort where Madeleine vanished in 2007. Although time and environmental factors had worn the objects down, forensic teams remained hopeful that some form of evidence could still be extracted. The items, though damaged, were sent for thorough analysis at a forensic laboratory in Germany, where specialists began testing them for DNA, biological traces, and other materials that might help piece together the mystery of what happened to Madeleine. The technological advancements in forensic science in 2025 provided new hope. Experts in forensic biology and DNA analysis have made significant strides, developing methods capable of extracting minute traces of biological material, even from objects long exposed to the elements. In this context, there was a possibility that, despite the wear and tear of time, advances in forensic science could still yield crucial results. The lab was tasked with identifying any genetic material or traces that might link these objects to Madeleine, Brueckner, or anyone else involved in the crime. However, the situation presented a challenge. While technology may have advanced, the effectiveness of such analysis would depend on the extent to which the samples were still viable. But the situation grew more complex with the looming prospect of Christian Brueckner's potential early release from prison. If Brueckner were to be freed before any new evidence could be definitively linked to him, the legal significance of the findings could be compromised. The discovery of these objects, although promising, might no longer hold the same weight if Brueckner was no longer incarcerated or under strict legal surveillance. This raised the question of whether evidence discovered after his release would be sufficient to move forward with the prosecution. If new evidence were to surface after his freedom, it could be too late to ensure that justice was served. Moreover, any delays or gaps in bringing the case to court could result in difficulties in prosecuting Brueckner, especially if his release allowed him to distance himself from the investigation once more. Thus, the timing of these forensic breakthroughs became critical. The closer they came to Brueckner's release, the less meaningful they might be in a legal sense. In the wake of such revelations, the global community, alongside the McCann family, found themselves trapped in a paradox. While forensic science in 2025 offered hope, the legal window to act swiftly was rapidly closing. The potential for new evidence to resurface in the investigation could ultimately be undermined by the complexity of prosecuting a suspect who may no longer be in custody. For the McCanns, every passing moment felt like a race against time, as the clock ticked down to the potential release of the man they believed was responsible for their daughter's disappearance. In the end, the question became not only about whether new forensic technology could solve the case, but whether it would matter if the suspect was no longer held accountable. The case of Madeleine McCann is one marked not only by a missing child, but also by systemic failures at multiple levels of law enforcement across 3 countries, Portugal, the UK, and Germany. These failures were not isolated incidents, but rather the culmination of a series of mistakes, miscommunications, and bureaucratic hurdles that hindered the pursuit of justice, leaving Madeleine's family with a sense of hopelessness. What sets this case apart from other high-profile disappearances is the complicated interplay of international law enforcement, the lack of coordination, and the failure to fully prosecute the main suspect, Christian Brueckner. When comparing it to other well-known missing persons cases that were resolved, it's clear that justice wasn't just delayed, it was obstructed by the very systems that were supposed to protect and serve. The investigation into Madeleine's disappearance began in Portugal in May 2007, but the Portuguese police faced an uphill battle right from the start. The immediate reaction to Madeleine's disappearance was poorly managed. While the response of Madeleine's parents and their friends was one of frantic searching, the local police didn't secure the crime scene and failed to collect crucial forensic evidence from the apartment. Instead of treating the situation as an abduction right away, they entertained theories of a child wandering off, while also allowing the apartment to be contaminated by dozens of people coming in and out. In hindsight, it is evident that this lack of forensic preservation, a basic requirement in any crime investigation, could have severely hampered the chances of discovering the truth early on. To make matters worse, the Portuguese police turned their focus on the McCanns as suspects, which diverted attention away from the potential real perpetrators. It was a system already riddled with inefficiencies, which ultimately failed to act decisively. In 2011, the case was handed over to British authorities after the Portuguese police closed the case. The British response during the years that followed was characterized by a lack of urgency. There were moments when Britain could have pushed for further action, especially considering that Madeleine was British, yet the UK authorities failed to put enough pressure on Portugal to continue investigating effectively. By 2017, after an enormous amount of taxpayer money had been poured into the investigation, British police declared they were unable to identify any significant leads. At the same time, public interest in the case was waning, and without the sustained effort from both Portuguese and UK authorities, the case was on the verge of being forgotten. It was a stark contrast to how other famous missing person cases were handled, where continuous pressure and dedicated resources ensured that the investigation remained in the public eye, even when it seemed like there was no hope. It wasn't until 2020 that the case took a dramatic turn when German authorities announced that they had identified Christian Brueckner as the prime suspect. By this time, Madeleine's case had already been cold for over a decade. Germany's investigation, while groundbreaking in many ways, was not without its own problems. The initial announcement in 2020 that they had clear evidence that Madeleine was dead, yet no clear details were provided, left the public with even more questions. German investigators had spent years not coordinating adequately with Portuguese authorities, creating an uncoordinated investigation across borders. Additionally, despite finding significant new leads, such as phone data placing Brueckner near the scene of Madeleine's disappearance, the lack of collaboration between international police agencies, coupled with legal constraints, meant the case was not closed or solved swiftly. While there was hope that Brueckner's conviction for other crimes in the region would provide justice for Madeleine, by 2025, with Brueckner's release looming, the authorities still failed to secure a conviction in her case. When comparing Madeleine McCann's case to other high-profile missing persons cases, such as that of Hannah Up in the U.S., or the disappearance of Natalie Holloway in Aruba, it becomes evident that speed, coordination, and transparency in the investigation can significantly impact the outcome. In many of these cases, there was a more immediate and sustained international response, better forensic collection, and most importantly, a more unified effort between local and international agencies. For instance, when Natalie Holloway went missing in Aruba, there was immense international pressure that kept the investigation alive, with continuous media attention and collaborative efforts between the U.S. and Dutch authorities. While the cases share their own unique complexities, the differences in the handling of investigations often come down to how quickly authorities act, how well they preserve the crime scene, and how unified the agencies are. The key issue with the Madeleine McCann case was that the justice system itself created barriers. From the Portuguese police's lack of coordination with other agencies, to Britain's failure to push for stronger action when it had the opportunity, and finally, to Germany's delayed involvement that came years after critical evidence was missed, the lack of a streamlined, collaborative effort led to a situation where justice was continually delayed. It wasn't just the lack of action in the investigation that stood in the way of justice. It was the institutional failures that compounded the problem. The system was simply too fragmented and poorly coordinated to provide the necessary support to bring Madeleine home or identify the person responsible for her disappearance. Finally, there's a broader, more critical issue at the heart of this case. Justice isn't just about finding the perpetrator, it's also about ensuring that the system works in a way that prevents criminals from escaping. Christian Brueckner, despite being a prime suspect in Madeleine's case, may soon walk free. If that happens, it would be a stark failure of the justice system to bring about real consequences for a man who, if guilty, is responsible for devastating a family and a nation. The question is, can justice truly be served when the systems in place fail to keep a dangerous man behind bars? The failure of the justice system to prevent Brueckner's early release, or to secure a timely conviction for Madeleine's disappearance, highlights that justice can be obstructed by the very structures meant to protect society. What the McCanns and the world have learned from this case is that the fight for justice doesn't stop with identifying the criminal. It is also about making sure the criminal faces the full force of the law. Until Brueckner is held accountable, the system's failure will continue to overshadow any potential resolution, leaving justice hanging in the balance. The case of Madeleine McCann remains tragically unresolved, despite the passage of nearly 18 years since her disappearance on May 3, 2007. While her family, the McCanns, continues to search for their daughter, there has been little progress in the investigation over the years. As Madeleine's case lingers in the public consciousness, the McCann family lives in a constant state of uncertainty and emotional turmoil, unable to move forward without knowing whether Madeleine is alive or dead, and whether justice will ever be served. The hope for justice has been repeatedly dashed, particularly as the case has encountered delays and ineffective coordination between international law enforcement agencies. With no closure in sight, the McCanns remain locked in an unending cycle of hope and despair. Despite these ongoing struggles, the McCanns have never given up on their fight for answers. They have been vocal in their belief that a child cannot just disappear on their own, and someone must be held responsible for Madeleine's abduction. They have consistently maintained that Madeleine did not wander off, but that someone must have taken her and caused her harm. For the McCanns, this is not a question of uncertainty, but a matter of moral certainty. Someone is to blame, and that person must face justice. Their message to law enforcement and the public is clear: continue the search and never forget Madeleine. In addition to their persistent calls for answers, the McCanns have pleaded with the international community not to forget Madeleine. They have stressed that the case should remain a priority, and they have urged the public to continue applying pressure on authorities to ensure that the investigation moves forward. With the investigation often stalling and legal complexities obstructing progress, the McCanns understand that the world's attention is essential. They believe that without sustained public interest and support, the case could easily fall by the wayside, as so many others have. The McCanns' tireless advocacy for their daughter has helped keep Madeleine's name in the spotlight, but they recognize the importance of collective action in the fight for justice. Central to this fight is the figure of Christian Brueckner, the convicted sex offender who has become the primary suspect in Madeleine's disappearance. Brueckner's behavior has raised significant concerns, both in terms of his criminal history and his psychological profile. A known sex offender with a history of abusing children, Brueckner has been described as someone who provokes law enforcement, often going into hiding and using multiple false identities. His pattern of criminal behavior suggests that he could easily reoffend if not properly incarcerated. Brueckner's pattern of reoffending is particularly alarming, as sex offenders like him often commit repeated crimes, especially when they are not held accountable for their actions. His ability to evade authorities by living a transient life and using false documentation has made it difficult for law enforcement to build a solid case against him. The danger posed by Brueckner is compounded by his continuing mobility, as he is known to have moved across borders, avoiding permanent residency and using aliases. This makes it incredibly difficult for authorities to keep track of him. His history of evading capture is especially troubling because it suggests that he might continue to pose a threat to society if left unmonitored. The potential for him to reoffend is significant if he is released from prison without facing charges related to Madeleine's case. The McCanns, along with the public, fear that if Brueckner is freed and no legal action is taken against him for Madeleine's disappearance, he could slip back into society and potentially harm other children. This looming fear has been a constant source of anxiety for the McCanns, who are aware that justice for Madeleine could be forever out of reach if Brueckner is allowed to disappear once again. As Brueckner's release date nears, the possibility of new child disappearances has become a disturbing topic of speculation. Many are asking, if another child goes missing in 2026, will Brueckner be investigated again? This question arises from the fear that Brueckner will be allowed to escape accountability, even if new evidence comes to light after his release. The potential lack of oversight and monitoring after his release makes it clear that there is a significant risk of him being able to evade justice once again. Authorities, both in Germany and internationally, must act quickly to ensure that Brueckner does not slip through the cracks of the legal system and become a repeat offender. In addition to the external threats posed by Brueckner's freedom, there are concerns about possible internal interference within the investigation. The delays in prosecuting Brueckner have led to suspicions that someone within the system might be protecting him, whether through failure to act or deliberate obfuscation. The lack of coordination between international law enforcement agencies, as well as the prolonged delays in charging Brueckner with Madeleine's abduction, suggests that there may be forces at play that are hindering the pursuit of justice. These internal obstacles have raised serious questions about the integrity of the investigation and whether Brueckner's freedom is being enabled by more than just his own cunning. Ultimately, Madeleine McCann remains missing, and Christian Brueckner is on the verge of being released. This combination of unresolved tragedy and legal uncertainty makes the case even more complicated and fraught with unanswered questions. While the McCanns have not given up hope, the failure of the legal system to bring justice for Madeleine remains a harsh reality. Someone must be held responsible for her disappearance, and the international community cannot afford to forget this case. The McCanns' message is as relevant today as it was in 2007. Justice for Madeleine is not just about finding the perpetrator, but about ensuring that the system works, that the perpetrator is held accountable, and that justice is truly served. The fight for Madeleine's justice continues, and the world must not let her case fade into history.